So welcome to the third part of this innovation, creativity and innovation module. In this part, we'll try to distill into a set of actionable rules some of the ideas and theories that we have been discussing so far. That's why this part is called a Think and Act as an Artist. As Giuseppe said at the end of the previous module, we have classified these rules into strategies and basically into groups. Let's start with the left strategies. The left strategies, we also call the strategies as push into order strategies. These strategies basically help us to simplify the world, the reality, into an order with which we are already familiar. So in order to do this, we normally tend to eliminate all the information that for some reason we consider as irrelevant, and until what we perceive actually makes a good match with the model and the order we have in mind. The first one, so we have four of them. The first one is a strategy that we call subtract details. I'm going to use visual art to give you examples and then apply this to some business and entrepreneurial applications in the real world. So this painting by Pablo Picasso is actually the representation of a little village in Spain, and it's an example of Cubist painting. Cubists tended to represent reality through very elementary forms, and normally cubes, pyramids. So in this way, they try to capture the essence of an object by representing it in a very simple form. In this particular case, probably what Picasso was trying to do was to represent these old houses and buildings as rocks that actually sort of emerge from the landscape, from the rocky landscape and dry landscape that is typical of the region of Spain. In this way, Picasso was able to capture the one particular character of this place. In this other painting, different artists, different period, William Turner just represents a train that is going through a landscape, and the train is actually just a black spot across two diagonal lines. But this, and then there's a lot of mist and fog, if you want. But this very lack of details actually gives us the impression of the speed of the train and how fast it's going through this otherwise peaceful landscape. Now, the application of the idea of removing details in design and business are really countless. I have a few here for you to consider. So on the LC4 chair invented by Le Corbusier is actually just derived from the simple shape of a human body at rest. In the lower part of the slide, you see the Ikea Besta furniture line. There is just a set of cubes, normally monochromatic, that you can assemble in multiple ways. So you can generate very interesting composition just by using very simple shape. Twitter is very famous for its 140 characters rule, recently changed into 180, but still very short text. Instagram is now possibly the most popular social network, especially among young people. And if you think what it is, Instagram is just a Facebook that has been stripped out of a lot of features that users don't want, or they're just not functional to share images. And then the iMac. The iMac was the computer that marked the resurrection of Apple when Steve Jobs came back in charge, and it was welcomed but also criticized for its lack of details, primarily the lack of a floppy disk at that time. But eventually people didn't really bother about it. So this is just a plastic monolith, very beautiful and designed for the internet era. Strategy number 2 is still part of this set of strategies that we use to simplify reality. And it's about symmetry. Symmetry is very intuitive and it's very efficient because with symmetry we basically use only half of the information. It's a very common strategy that artists used, especially in Renaissance for the presentation of holy images, like This Maestà by Lorenzo Lotto. Normally, the symmetry in these paintings was a way to convey the idea of divine order and also hierarchy between the different characters in the painting. So that's why you can see also symmetry very clearly used in this crucifixion by Masaccio. And symmetry is widely used. We tend to like symmetric objects. So for instance, logos tend to be very symmetric. Also in physical beauty, we tend to associate beauty with a very symmetric face. But symmetry can also be applied in a more, if you want, abstract sense. The so-called management science is full of examples. So symmetry was applied by Frederick the Great generals in deploying troops on the field. It was widely evoked by more recent works in organization theory, like the Principles of Scientific Management by Frederick Taylor or the Max Weber work on bureaucratic organization. In general, in organization science, symmetry is a way to create order, to communicate the structure of power and authority, and also as a way to create and manage tensions and achieve equilibrium in these abstract structures. The strategy number 3 is what we call grouping. Grouping is also very intuitive. One way we use to simplify things is to cluster similar objects into higher level categories. But grouping is a little bit more sophisticated than that. And again, I want to use a painting to show you why. This is a painting by the Spanish painter El Greco, The Sepulture of the Earl of Orgaz. And what you see in this painting is actually a story. So this nobleman dies, then his relatives, his friends mourn his death, and then he ascends to heaven in the grace of God. So this story is represented graphically through 3 major groups, as you can see here in the slide. So grouping is not just about putting things together in a way that they are similar, but also about creating connections between the different groups. Sometimes we do this to tell a story. So grouping has also a narrative dimension. An interesting application of this idea, an interesting case study, is Starbucks. Everybody knows Starbucks, especially if you are from the US, but it's now an international chain of cafes around the world. And in an interview, the founder of Starbucks, Mr. Schultz, says that the idea came to him while he was in Italy. He was in Italy for business purposes. He was in Milan. And then, let's read his own words. He says, that's when I was walking to the street of Milan, and every 20, 30 yards, you are intercepted literally with an Italian coffee bar. And I walked in all of these places and kept seeing the theater, the romance, the nectar of the gods, which is espresso, all the elegance, the style. But what really struck with me was the sense of community. And so I realized, while I was in Italy, that Starbucks was in the coffee business, but perhaps the wrong part of the business. In fact, at that point, Starbucks was already existing, but it was just a coffee seller. Specifically, they sold coffee beans. And at that time, there were only 4 Starbucks in the entire world. So what was Schultz's creative intuition? It was about recategorize coffee from a product, from something you consume, to something you experience. We call this coffee as a context. And so first, there was the creative recategorization. Second, there was the story, the narrative that Schultz tried to implement in the definition of the Starbucks concept, which is basically centered around the idea that Starbucks is a community store. So it's a place where you go to meet people, to discuss, to have social interaction. And this is what makes the difference between Starbucks and all the other coffee makers at that time. Strategy number 4 is what we call split. What this is about? Splitting is about organizing information at different levels so that you can access information easily. So you can explore information at the different levels, and you can move across levels depending on what you need and the level of details and complexity you need to deal with. So again, let's use a painting to illustrate how this works. So this is a painting by Johannes Vermeer. It's called The Little Street. It's just a facade of a building. You see it's very organized, has a very regular geometry through a grid that creates order. And then what you have also is some open windows and some open doors through which you can kind of zoom in the building and observe what is going on in the building. So you have two levels of analysis, the facade and the inside of the building, where other stories are occurring. An application of this idea is the thermostat Nest. Nest is a successful product, you might be familiar with it already. And it was created by a startup founded by two Apple expats. And their idea was basically to make the design of the thermostat very, very simple. Because, you know, regularly, the regular thermostat that is on the market, it tends to be very complicated. There's a lot of buttons. There's an interface that is not very intuitive. People have a hard time to work with it. So what they thought was, okay, let's make this very simple. And the design, as you see, is just a knob. So all you do is basically regulate, move this knob and regulate the temperature at the level that you want to have it. But this simple design actually includes complexity. Only the complexity in this case is hidden into some additional device. In this case, it's just a software app that is in your phone that you can use to control this device in a more sophisticated way. But of course, this is up to you. It's your discretion. You can go for the very simple way, or you can nest into it and look at the more sophisticated functionalities that the device offers you. So we have seen so far 4 strategies that we use to simplify reality and to remove information. Now let's look at the other set of strategies, what we call push into novelty. So what happens? Simplification doesn't always work. Sometimes we realize that our simple idea is not effective. It's not able to capture the complexity of what we are observing, what we are interacting with. And this is particularly true when we have to deal with a novel situation, a situation we are not familiar with. So we have no pre-existing knowledge, we have no pre-existing models, or if we have some, it's not enough. So what we do, basically, we look for novelty. And with left strategies, we eliminate information. With right strategies, we add information in order to enrich our mental representation. So the first one is what we call emphasize. Again, let's use paintings. On the left side, you see a painting by El Greco again. It's a San Sebastian. San Sebastian was killed in this way. And it's a very traditional representation of this saint in religious art. But what you can notice is that his body is unnaturally elongated. And why El Greco did this? Of course, it was not because he was not able to draw a body, but because he wanted to convey the idea that of the pain that this man was feeling. So his body was stretched, was elongated because of the pain. But at the same time, it was kind of ascending toward, or transcending, if you want, toward the experience of martyrdom to God. And so this tension toward the sky was also another message that this graphic representation actually gives us. On the right side, you see a female portrait by Amedeo Modigliani. Also here is a very abnormal representation, because you see this lady with this very long neck. Now, why Modigliani does this? Because normally the long neck is associated to a beautiful face. So it just made that more evident. He emphasized that aspect to communicate the beauty of this woman. It's the same mechanism that is widely used in caricature. So what is a caricature in the end? It's just a regular face, an average face, which is very impersonal, to which we add some abnormal features that are very distinctive for that particular face, like big ears, big nose, or funny hair, whatever is distinctive for that particular person. And this is what it makes it interesting, because the average face, as you can see here from this slide, is very dull. Let's see an application to design of the emphasize strategy. You might know this car. This is a Jaguar E-Type. It was created in the 60s and was very popular for a while. Of course, it's a luxury car, sport car. And Enzo Ferrari, the founder of Ferrari, the Italian automaker, said this was one of the most beautiful design ever for a car. So it's interesting to see, first of all, you see the shape is very elongated. So it gives you the sense of speed, because when object moves into speed, they kind of look longer. But the genesis of this artifact, of this car, is interesting, because it actually was the evolution of a previous model, the Jaguar D-Type. But the Jaguar D-Type was not a regular car, it was a race car, so it was not for the market. In that case, the shape was dictated by some engineering constraints, because the engineers had to make a structure that was able to support a powerful engine. So there were no aesthetic consideration. It was just aerodynamics and power. But in the end, when Jaguar decided to make a commercial version of this car, they inherited this design, even if there was no need for it anymore. Because of course the E-Type was fast, but not fast as a race car. Nevertheless, they kept it because they understood that this elongated design communicated the same message: speed, power, and sport. So this is a very interesting case of mix of aesthetic and engineering constraints into one beautiful design. It's also interesting to notice that this was kind of anticipated by artists maybe 50 years before. This is a futurist artist, Luigi Russolo, and he represents a car here. And you see this black shape is very fragmented, but it's actually a car that is portrayed while it's moving. And the idea of Russolo was to capture the dynamism of this movement. And as you can see, it's not that different from this idea. So the artist kind of communicated the same message with different medium, of course. Strategy number 6 is what we call remix. So sometimes a way to introduce novelty in a system is just to recombine its parts in a novel way. So again, let's get inspiration from visual art. I assume that most of you are familiar with this monument. It's the Eiffel Tower, one of the most iconic monuments in the world, and one of the most visited for sure, and of course one of the most photographed and represented. So it's very hard to make a picture of this or a representation, and visual representation of the Eiffel Tower, because it's so common, it's so trivial if you want. So, but not if you are a creative person. If you are a creative person, if you are an artist like Robert Delaunay, what do? Okay, let's scramble this into pieces and let's reassemble these pieces in a novel way. And then what we got is a very unusual representation that is also very fascinating, by the way. And probably Delaunay's idea was to communicate the uniqueness of this monument at the time in which, pretty much the time at which it was, if not constructed, at least becoming famous, and to communicate the strength and the power of modernism, and also a little bit the fact that many people perceive this construction as ugly. And actually, when it was finished, it was highly criticized as an outrageous thing for Paris. And today is actually the symbol of the city. Let's apply this to management, business, and entrepreneurship. What you see in this picture is the Pixar atrium. So this is a big atrium in the Pixar headquarters in California. And the building was literally designed around the atrium, because Steve Jobs wanted a place where people could meet and talk in a sort of random way. What he was trying to implement was actually a well-known fact in innovation theory, that fact that innovation, more often than not, originates from the semi-random collision of different ideas. So he just wanted a place where people had to go, had to meet others, and had to discuss with others about what we're doing, for instance. And apparently this is also why most of the bathrooms in the buildings are located at the level, because the idea was to give people reasons to go there, and then while going there, stumble into other people and discuss their projects. So creativity is really about remixing ideas into something novel. Strategy number 7 is a concept that we call the power of the center. So this concept was proposed for the first time by Arnheim, a psychologist, one of the founders of the so-called Gestalt psychology. According to Arnheim, when we analyze, for instance, an image or an object, we look for centers of attention. That's something that he calls visual centers. Like, for instance, in this painting, I don't need to tell you that the sun there is pretty much something that immediately attracts our attention. So it's definitely an object that has an interesting visual weight. But it's not just that. Its function is more dynamic. Visual centers have the ability to generate around them what we call a field of forces, a dynamism around which the entire representation is kind of structured. So when we put everything together, it's actually like the whole representation is anchored, is hinging on a few visual centers, maybe just one or a few ones. And this provides us with a way to give a structure to this representation and then to understand it. This is also evident in this very famous painting by Van Gogh, The Starry Night. You see that eventually the sky, which is the most interesting part of this painting, is actually a collection of emotional vortexes that are basically the stars. These rotating stars maybe were the way through which Van Gogh expressed this emotion, maybe his pain, in contemplating this night landscape. But you can see that the entire landscape kind of rotates or is at least animated by the force, by the dynamic force of these vortexes. Now let's apply this to business. You might be familiar with this idea, this model. It's called a business model canvas. The business model canvas is just a visual representation of a business model. You see several building blocks with different names. But what you see at the center is what is called value proposition. Value proposition is what you deliver to customers as the ultimate value with your product. And the way you build a business model canvas is by anchoring all the other building blocks around this value proposition. For instance, the value proposition is designed for a certain type of customers. So once you define the value proposition, you can describe the customers. But then once you know the customers, you have to define the way you want to relate or build relationship with these customers, or the way you want to distribute your service or your product so that it reaches the final customers. So as you can see, everything is depending, can be derived from the way the value proposition has been designed. Now, the best businesses, the best companies do this in a very consistent way. Let me give you an example. You might know this company, Caterpillar. Caterpillar is one of the leading companies in the industry of construction and mining equipment. So their value proposition is anchored on one basic fundamental satisfaction driver, which is repairability. And why is that? Because in this type of business, if you don't repair the machine at the very moment, or very quickly at least, it has issues, you are going to incur into big losses. This is pretty clear in the citation we have reported on the slide by one former Caterpillar executive. So if that machine doesn't function, work doesn't get done, deadlines are missed, related tasks have to be rescheduled, customers and subtractors get angry, reputations are affected, opportunities open up for competitors, and money is lost. In big projects, for instance, you pay big penalties when you're late. So how Caterpillar solved this? Well, their choice was make your dealer your partner, which is also the title of this HBR article. The idea was to invest heavily in this network of dealers to make them well equipped to deal immediately and also in a very fast and effective way with the issues wherever these issues were manifesting themselves. So the dealer was the real power of the center for this company. All the rest of the company was built around this idea of having very good dealers that were very good at intervening when the problem occurred. Last strategy, and so this is the strategy number 8 and the last of the right strategies, is what we call contrast and balance. So again, let's use a painting to give you an example. This is a painting by Degas depicting one of his favorite subjects, a ballerina, a young dancer, and white dresses. What you notice in this painting is something weird, if you want, a little bit strange. On the left side, there's a man with a black suit. You don't even see his head, and you don't know what this man is doing there. He adds a little bit of mystery to this painting, but from the visual point of view, so the mystery is definitely from the narrative point of view, but from the visual point of view, it's also a contrast between two different shapes with two different visual weights, positioned in a way that they contrast from the color point of view, but also from the compositional and geometric point of view. So these contrasts create a tension that our brain enjoys to have and to deal with. So, of course, as we say, this is a matter of affective complexity. Too much tension would be unpleasant. Too little tension would be unpleasant. That's why we need a master as Degas to realize this type of equilibrium. Let's see an application to entrepreneurship and business. You might be familiar with this advertising campaign by L'Oreal. It's a very old campaign. It started more than 40 years ago, almost 50 years ago at this point, in 1971. And the slogan for this campaign was, because I'm worth it. So why this is an example of contrast and balance? Because this campaign was ideated in a way that it was the complete opposite of the dominant advertising strategy that was present at that time in the cosmetic industry. Like if you look at this particular ad, you see that it says that you have to choose something to make yourself beautiful to please him. So you make yourself beautiful for your man. You don't make yourself beautiful because you deserve it. So L'Oreal actually did that. And it was, of course, a very political statement, especially at that time. There were a lot of social movements and feminist movements fighting gender-biased campaigns and, in general, gender-biased society. And so L'Oreal was very bold in joining this protest and making an advertisement that was very revolutionary for the time. But it's also contrast and balance in the same ad. It's not just contrast and balance as opposed to the dominant advertising for cosmetics. Because L'Oreal did not, while endorsing a feminist position, did not give up on beauty, did not give up on the fact that a woman can be at the same time beautiful and independent. So I do it not for him, but I do it for me. This concludes our review of our 8 strategies. The 8 strategies are something that we have distilled from our research storage, and we have tried to condense into some sort of actionable framework for you to apply. To wrap up and to summarize, the strategies offer us practical rules to rework our design. So what you can do when you are designing something, you can use these rules to make it more simple or to make it more complicated. And you do this in a very iterative fashion because there's no easy recipe for success. You have to experiment with different designs. Sometimes it's too simple, sometimes it's too complicated. If you make enough variations, you may end up in hitting the effective complexity spot. So when the design is too complex, we eliminate information to make it simple, and so we push into order. When the design is too simple and trivial, we add information because we want to make it exciting and interesting, so we push into novelty. And the other last point I want to make is that, as also our examples show, you can apply this approach not just to the design of products or visual artifact. It's actually very general. You can apply this approach to organizational design, to communication design, to team management, and even to leadership. There's very interesting work being done on aesthetic leadership recently. This concludes our module, and at the very end we have several reading suggestions. Instead of providing you with a list of references, we thought it was nicer to give you a bunch of titles in a visual fashion. As you see, it's a mix of works from different fields like design, art, science, and management. We hope you enjoyed this module, and feel free to contact us if you have any question or if you want to discuss more about this link between creativity, design, and entrepreneurship. Thank you very much.